Fair enough? Okay. And if you think of any other questions you want to ask before we actually close out, then you can ask them of me before we wrap up. So now let's go ahead and let's take a look at the project. Okay, so we're talking about how firms value assets. And in this discussion, we have to think about some of the different ways that we have considered here. And I tell you that you have no less than 1,500 words to describe some innovation that's going to take place within your company. And whether this is your company because literally you own it, or whether it's a company you work for, or a company that you have pulled out of thin air, or one that you've looked up in FactSet or Value Line or Bloomberg or what, I don't really care. I care that it is a company that you can conceptualize. If it were me, and if I owned my own company, I would use my own company. If I worked for somebody else's company, I would use that company as my example. And I would use a project within that company that I could get my head around. Maybe it's got something to do with your area of responsibility, okay? Diana's looking at this and saying, you know, if we would rearrange this nurse's station and give a new data tracking tool and communication system at a cost of $200,000, it's going to spin off these savings, and all of a sudden we're off to the races with a net present value and decision criteria on a project within the hospital that Diana works for. Or it's Andrew's company. Andrew works for Family Search, and they're going to launch a new product line within Family Search. So, you know, we can look at this a bunch of ways, but I want you to think about a project, whether it's in your little company or you're part of a big company or just some hypothetical company in which you can then forecast some cash flows, identify some discount rates, come upon a valuation, and compare that valuation with a cost function as an investment to get a net present value or some decision criteria like IRR. I'm looking for you to discuss a project in those kinds of terms and metrics for me.
So just to clarify, Rick, like if I want to do my company that I work for, SVB, I can't just do the company. I have to find some sort of project or initiative within the company and do a financial model on the project, not the company itself?
I'm giving you a lot of latitude, Matt. If you want to simply do it on the company itself, you are all welcome to do it on an entire company. The only problem with that then is we must come up with some net present values and some internal rate of returns. So in order to do that, we have to not only think about the present value of the future cash flows of the company, but we have to think about how much somebody's actually paying for it in an invested amount today. Well, if it's the same amount as we think its value is, well, the net present value is zero. The internal rate of return is the same value as the discount rate. And we put that into our decision criteria filter. Okay, so we can use the whole company, but you just got to know what you're doing.
So if I understand just to reframe what you said, is like, well, you can do the company itself, but what your final conclusion is already essentially known in the marketplace.
Not necessarily. So Taylor says, you know, you work for an interesting company, Matt, and I know that you've come up with a estimated value of $200 million. And I also know that the last time this company had a transaction, it was based upon a $160 million valuation. So I'll tell you what, you've come up with a $200 million value. I'm going to offer you $20 million more than the last person did, so $180 million. If you accept my offer, then here's what the net present value is. Here's what the internal rate of return is. Here's the modified internal rate of return. Here's how I would respond to that, and so on.
Okay, so that makes sense. I guess ultimately the reason I'm just bringing that up is like, I think just from finding the inputs, like I feel like I'm kind of following along up to this point fairly well, but just well enough to get by, to where I feel like if I try to start thinking through like, well, what's going to be a project in my organization, and then extrapolate all these metrics like, EBIT and cash flow and invested capital, no plat from a project rather than just having the financial statements, it just might be a little bit more straightforward and enable me to actually deliver an actual assignment, if that makes sense.
So can we play a game together and kind of roll this out for a second in front of everybody? So I know you've told me several times, but I'm not sure exactly that I understand what you actually do in exchange for a paycheck. What is it that you do in exchange for a paycheck?
So I manage risk for the card operations department at
Love it. Love it. So a project might be that you have identified that if you had 2 more analysts working with you, you could be present and current enough on all of your risk management. You could know the company's inside and out well enough that you could have a better risk management outcome. And it will cost you the annual salary of 2 full-time people, not unlike yourself. So that's at least $1 million a year, right? So annual salary of those 2 people. And you believe that a better risk management outcome will avoid $3 million of annual exposure to losses. So it'll cost us $1 million. It'll give us a $3 million improvement in our exposure to losses. And I believe that our company's got a discount rate that is similar to our borrowing cost for capital of 7%. And you now have all the elements that you need to do a discounted cash flow, come up with an internal rate of return, come up with an IRR, a net present value and such. Don't believe that you have to be as global as the whole income statement. You're welcome to be that global. But if you think about the ground we have trod together in the last 6 weeks, we've started with something as simple as revenue minus expenses. Well, what's the revenue from a potential project? What are the expenses from that potential project? That's EBIT. Take EBIT times 1 minus the tax rate. Are there capital commitments, changes in net working capital and net capital spending? That takes you to free cash flow. Buddy, you are off to the races. How most people err with this assignment is they make it too complex. You're now going from the global company, and you have the latitude to take it all the way down to we're going to buy a new copier and it's going to save us money.
Okay, so just to frame that back to you. So I think to your point, I was talking to some other students about this. I think initially you anticipate a final project like this, you're going to take everything you learned in the class and shove it all into one project, right? So this isn't necessarily supposed to be, you've got a multi-columnar of this and you've got a full forecast of all these different things. You might use conceptually those things, but right. The idea is to say, here's a high-level concept of what I've learned and applied to X, Y, Z, whether that be the company or the project. And that's why that's why if it should be more than 4,000 words in the sense that it shouldn't be overly complex. There shouldn't be all these different models and every component of every class we shouldn't address in our paper. It should just be kind of high level. This is how you would make a decision. This is the variables you would use, et cetera.
Exactly. So and just kind of as an add-on to that, I have taken you guys through the various assignments as best I could in the time frame we have together to a fairly high level of complexity. And I know from your output and from our conversations and your, both in WhatsApp and here and privately, et cetera, I have a sense of who has what kind of comprehension, right? I now want to know if you can dumb it down if you would like to. Now, if you don't want to dumb it down, if you don't want to simplify it, you don't have to. You can keep it high level complex. It's harder, take you more time, it's more rigorous, but if you want to make it simple, show me that you understand it well enough to make it simple. I think you do. You just have to step back. And going through this project, all of a sudden you realize you can apply these metrics to something as simple as buying a new delivery van, to something as complex as buying an international company to have a subsidiary of your firm and everything in between.
I'm sorry. I've got a question. So what does a paper like this look like? I mean,
It looks like a paper, Michael. It's got an no. I know.
Beginning, middle, and end.
It's got an introduction. It's got, and you're going to tell me, and in that introduction, you're going to line out what the project is in simple terms, right? And then it's got some body to it. And part of that body is more detail about the project, maybe more detail about the company in which the project is going to reside. And then it's going to have some quantitative sections that's telling me about the revenues and the expenses and the cash flows and the commitments and all of this. And then it's going to have a section that's the valuation modeling structure. And then you're going to go ahead and compare that valuation you calculate with what you estimate it will cost you to invest in this project or in this company. And then you'll come up with NPV and IRR and profit index. And your conclusion then wraps it all up and saying, based upon those things, here's what we think we should do. I know I tell you sometimes you got a lot of latitude, and I really do mean that. I don't care if this is a small project or a big project. I don't care if it's a whole company or a part of a company. I don't care if it's Mike's Dry Cleaners or this multinational clothing conglomerate and fashion house that's let out of Paris. I really don't care. I care if you can, in language that's understandable to each of us, give me an idea of a project or a company and walk me through it. You will learn, you will learn a lot in doing this, and moreover, you will help yourself realize how much you've learned as you go through this assignment. Because that's what other students have told me as they've done this.
Greg, do you have examples of previous students?
Yes, and I don't share them. What I am happy to do though, I mentioned this last night. So we're a couple of weeks out from this being due, right? I think this thing is due, says June 30th, okay? So we're a couple of weeks out from this thing being due. If you put together a draft of this, and if you want me to review it and give you comments back on it before you have to submit it, I'm happy to do that. If you're going to do that, I must receive it at least a week before the due date, because I may get 14 of them, right? I'm going to have to read them, and you're not my only class. And so if you want me to review it, give me at least a week before it's due. Well, I won't take a week to turn it around. I'll turn it around in a few days. But you then have several business days to finish it before it's due. But if you want me to review it and give you some commentary back, I'm happy to do that. Your output will include not only the paper, but I can't imagine how it wouldn't include a spreadsheet. Does that help?
I have another question. What if I want to open my own business? Can I do a project on that one, but it doesn't exist yet, but eventually I want to open my own business? Can I just come up with values, like with cash flows and
sure,
stuff like
Diana.
that?
Sure you can, because you're going to have to forecast revenues. You're going to have to forecast expenses. You're going to have to think about capital commitments. We now have free cash flow. You're going to have to think about what are the dynamics of a discount rate. You're opening up your own business. Your discount rate is going to be big, right? Because risk are us when we open up our new business. And then you're going to come up with a value. You're going to compare that value to what you believe is going to cost you to invest it or to open up this business. And now you've got the makings of decision criteria and NPV and IRR and profit index and everything. Sure, you bet. And by the way, some of you guys have capstones, or you've had other classes, or you have other classes where you've had to do projects that are not altogether dissimilar. If you want to use some of that material and then build on it, or use this to build on for a future one like you're getting ready to do, Matt, I have no difficulty doing that at all. I think you're simply being efficient.
Rick, I have a question related to that point, because I was just thinking about my capstone. There's some financial stuff I wanted to look at anyway, but I think it's going to evolve as we uncover the process of the business. Are you available over the summer? If I have further questions related to the capstone, can we bug you over your summer break?
Of course.
Okay, great.
And
you can say no.
for those of you that aren't about to finish, but your capstone's 6 months out or a year out, when we're done with this class, your accountability to me is over, but my accessibility for you is not.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Now, some of you may close this door, lock it, and burn the room down, hoping to never trod that path again. I know that's what Mario's going to do. I can tell by the look on his face. And that thing in back of Mandy, I'm not even sure what that is. It looks like a troll to me that's scaring the bejeebies out of me, Taft. But I think you get my point. Okay, any questions? Does this give you a better understanding of what I'm looking for here?
Better.
That's the best thing I've ever seen.
Took me a second to realize what that was, Mandy. You're taking me back to my childhood. Okay. You thought this is nostalgia. I think it's last week. So, all right. Anything else, guys, before we sign off?
One question is I'm assuming it's purposeful that our
Mandy, your tonal distortion is such that we can't understand anything you're saying. Too much of your bandwidth is being utilized by the background.
I was just wondering, the quiz number that we submitted with the two different attempts, it's making our rate average of 2. Is that for purposeful?
I'm sorry, Mandy. I have a recording of this now, by the way, guys. We might make some money off it. I'm pretty sure that an exorcist is on their way to your house and that your head's about to start spinning based upon the way your voice sounds. I'm pretty sure of it, okay? We can't understand what you're saying. I'm sorry. Okay. All right, guys. Well, if there's nothing else to say, Mandy, go ahead and text that to me. Or maybe now that you don't have the background, maybe you can say it.
It should affect me in my head.
No, it's not that. It's not the background.
It's still there.
It's awful. Okay. Shoot it to me through WhatsApp, and I'll answer it for all of us, okay? All right, guys. Good night. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.